Hello， 大家好，我係黎牧師。今日好開心咧，請到一位好資深嘅中學教師，同我哋分享有關加拿大教育制度。佢係教過小學同埋中學，但係咧慢慢咧就成為一個好資深嘅講師。點樣去改變教學嘅理念？佢亦都係寫過書，亦都係去世界各地，甚至係亞洲嘅地區，甚至上海、馬來西亞嘅地方咧，係講解教學嘅理念嘅。所以今日實在非常高興能夠有佢喺我哋當中，同我哋去分享有關加拿大嘅中學嘅教育制度。So, welcome to coming to us and to explain to us the secondary education in Canada, but maybe a little bit also about British Columbia. So, welcome.
Thank you. I'm pleased to be here.
So, while I'm talking today about some of the differences between the system of education for secondary students in Canada and comparing that to the secondary system that you may be used to in Hong Kong and other parts of Asia, I want you to keep in mind that this is really a lens or a perspective from my point of view of some of the similarities and differences. And when you're actually on the ground and looking at some of the differences, you may see some things that aren't exactly aligned with what I've said today because we're talking in very general trends. Many of my examples will be from schools in British Columbia in particular, and my curriculum examples will be from British Columbia curriculum. And some of them will be even more particular in looking at Richmond schools. But the trends in the general approaches to schooling in secondary schools in Canada will be more similar than they are different from province to province. So perhaps I can say, based on the experiences that I've had in working in schools in Asia and working in secondary schools in Canada, I think the biggest difference that you'll notice is, from my perspective, the Asian schools tend to have a very individualistic, competitive perspective where students are aiming to be the top of the pile and to beat others, and that is measured by a lot of testing, a lot of comparison, a lot of ranking, and you will notice in Canada that that is absolutely not the case, that our system is much more what I would think of as a socially democratic system where students are encouraged to work together, to develop personal skills as well as interpersonal skills, where the standards are high, but the standards aren't all based on recitation of content knowledge. It's not about the stuff you know, it's more about what you do with the content that you know. How do you apply it? How do you think critically and creatively? How do you solve problems? How do you work with others in different circumstances? And so what school looks like during the day is quite different than what you may be used to experiencing or what you experienced yourself as a student in secondary school. I know when I was in secondary school in Canada, it was more competitive. We were marked with grades and percentages. We were told where we ranked in the class and that was a prized important piece. That is very different than it is now. That's not what it is. That's one of our main goals. And I think that's probably the first thing that you'll notice that's different when you come. When you think about that difference, one of the differences that you're going to notice is homework, because families always talk about homework, and many of the families are very worried. They see the difference in homework as being a lack of rigor, and they're worried that their children won't be learning enough. I've heard many families have this conversation with me. Oh, this is such a loose system. Our children aren't doing very much homework. They're going to fall behind. This is just, it's not the way it should be. But I need to assure you that one of our markers for success is not how much homework you do, not how much memorizing you do, but the kind of thinking and work you do. So you'll see that your students are definitely doing, I can guarantee that your students are going to be doing, your kids are going to be doing less homework, and they're not just trying to trick you. They will be assigned less homework because we really focus on in-class learning. And so that in-class learning could be project-based, it could be organized around big ideas, students will work with partners and in groups. They won't be judged just on their group work and how everybody in the group does. They'll be judged on how they do as an individual within the group, but that's part of learning. So our curriculum is organized, in our new curriculum in British Columbia, for example, is organized around 3 threads. What you know, that's the knowledge base, which is very much what your curriculum has been organized around. What you do with the knowledge, how you apply it, how you use it, and what you understand, which are big ideas and a focus on conceptual understanding. And so when you look at know, do, and understand, that's quite a different way of organizing for teaching and learning. And so you'll notice a difference. And sometimes some of the students will say to me, oh, we don't have to do much work here. We're just in groups, just, talking and thinking and keeping rough notes or sketching or building things. It's not like when I was at home where I had to work hard, but they don't necessarily see this as work. We see this as intellectual work, and we see it as very important work. So you can also then anticipate the kind of skills that your children will need. They need to be able to learn with others. They need to be able to take turns, even in secondary. They need to think about how others' ideas influence their thinking and how they use that information and how they back up their understanding with concrete content. That's where they need to know their details and use their details. But that's very different than just taking a test and answering questions that have been predetermined about how many facts do you know around something. So let me talk for a moment about what you might notice as a difference in assessment and reporting. I think you're probably used to lots and lots of tests with percentages on them, or how many questions you got right, 96 out of 100, and then that translates into a percentage. You're going to see very few of those. You'll certainly see some from time to time, but assessment will be very, very different. Assessment can be looking at a project that a student has done against a set of established criteria that may have been co-created in the classroom with the teacher and the students, using the curriculum as a guide so that the standards are kept high, and the student's work will be assessed against this criteria. The student was likely also going to be asked to self-assess, and they may be asked to do a peer assessment where they receive feedback from their peers on how they've done on their project, and they may have that as a step that we call formative assessment along the way, and then they can take that feedback from their peers or maybe from their teachers and build that feedback into their final product. They'll also be assessed on the processes of learning that they're working with. So part of the assessment process may be an interview. It may be observations that the teacher is doing in the classroom. There may be a design framework where you look and say, have you got these aspects included? And so you're not done until you have these aspects included. So the criteria for what success looks like is much more evident, and it ties back into the know, do, and understand. And so we give students feedback along the way, and they're aware of what they need to do in order to demonstrate proficiency. And it's not a speed test. So if you get proficient, if you're proficient in aspects of what you're learning, as you're moving, maybe you're working on an essay and your feedback shows that you're proficient in certain aspects on this rubric, then you'll be encouraged to become proficient on some of the aspects that might be missing just now, or moving to extending. And so it's very clear what it is you want to be working toward, and you're involved in that process, because we want our students to become self-assessors. Instead of saying, is this good enough to a teacher, to be saying, I can tell this is good enough because I've achieved these standards. So much more responsibility for the student. And as you think about your children, you can imagine that some of them may handle this responsibility more easily than others, and some may need some more coaching and support. And we see that as part of the job that we do, not just in school, but with families, because we want our students to graduate as responsible, thoughtful citizens ready to participate in a democracy. You'll also notice a difference in standardized testing. We do very, very little standardized testing in the province of British Columbia. Some of the other provinces do a tiny bit more, but it is not a big name piece in Canadian education. In British Columbia, there are 3 assessments that all students will do in secondary school. These are part of our new curriculum. In grade 10, all students will do a provincial numeracy assessment. Now, you'll notice a difference, and your students will notice a difference in the numeracy assessment, because it's not just about memorizing algorithms. It's very language-based, and when it first was rolled out a few years ago, there were a lot of questions about it because you had to reason with math. And many students were used to performing very well in math by doing right answers and memorizing algorithms. And this assessment is much beyond that. This really has a critical thinking piece to it. And so there's a lot of reading and thinking and communicating your understanding and applying your math into real situations. So everybody does a numeracy assessment in grade 10, and everybody does a literacy assessment in grade 10 and grade 12. And you must achieve a certain standard on all 3 of those assessments in order to graduate. So there's not, you may have some year-end tests in some places, and in some subject areas that still happens, but that's not the main piece. It has to be part of what you do in order to graduate, nor are the standardized assessments. Having said that, when we look at international assessments, students in BC do very well in terms of their international assessments, and they're in the top 25%, and sometimes much higher than that in terms of their achievement. And universities say, because this is a question that I'm often asked by families, but if we don't have this rigor that we're used to, and it doesn't show up in the same way, how do these students do in university? And universities welcome our grads and say they do, as well as students coming from international schools. In Asia, as an example, it's just a different focus of coming in, and you're learning how to be a student and a learner. You take those skills with you.
Well, I think at this time, maybe can you say a little bit more about the students? Say they are, they're newly arrived, and just the education system is kind of foreign to them. And based on your years of experiences, what can you tell those students?
One of the things that students will report very quickly is that they just think these schools are noisy and busy, and that kids in Canada don't take education seriously, and there's too much laughing and fooling around and hanging out in groups, and just the noise of the school, the openness of the school can be quite different for them, because they're expecting to be very serious and sit quietly and listen to the teacher. And so to be welcomed into the classroom and to work sometimes in highly inclusive classrooms where students of all kinds of ability and backgrounds are together, and boys and girls are together, and they might be asked to sit together and work with people that they don't know really well in a group or a partnership, and expected to participate, and they may not be feeling confident about their English skills, and they're still going to be asked to participate. And so sometimes they're quite nervous and they're quite apprehensive because it looks different and it feels different. But what I notice, and I've watched with students and as I've talked with them as they go, they grow in confidence and competence in just amazing rates when they relax and kind of think, I can do this and I can handle this. And they often, students will find others who speak their first or second language, and they'll hang out with them. And that's a comfort level, and I think we all do that. As a student, what's my job here? What do I need to do? What does success look like? And not being afraid to ask for help. And to really think about speaking, not being nervous about speaking. We're so used to having students from all over the world with different levels of English competency and arriving in our classrooms, and our students are used to this because we've been in such a fortunate position where our experiences have grown because of all of the people who've come and entered our schools, which is very different than it was. We also know that the research suggests that it takes about 7 years to acquire proficiency in the academic language of English, and so people need to give themselves some patience, and families as well, that it's this is part of learning. There's some parts that you just can't rush, but practice makes a difference. So one of the things we can do to support kids in our families is to use English as much as possible, which is huge because it's so much easier and more comfortable to use your own language. So it just seems like, oh, please don't tell me that. But that piece is different. Schools in Richmond, for example, would have something called SWIS workers. Who are hired to help families and their children navigate the new system. And so on all the information that comes in, there's so much to come through. But really think about and ask the question of like, what do supports look like for us as families? And then to access them. Because sometimes we think, well, if I'm asking for help, it's a sign of weakness. But it's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of growth and strength, because that's who these people are. That's why they're there. It's to help us work our way through new systems and figure out how to work that. But
今日實在好開心聽到Faye老師講解加拿大特別係中學嘅教育制度。It has been wonderful. Thank you again.
You're so welcome. And remember, this is just a little glimpse. That window's just open a little bit in what we've talked about today. There's many more pieces to come in. So ask questions and welcome and ask questions when you have.
Great. Bye.
Bye.